So, you have a king, Charles I, who believes he was personally chosen by God to run the country. This isn't just a political theory for him, it's his entire personality. He looked at Parliament, the body of people supposed to represent the country, as a mild inconvenience, like a slow internet connection. He tried to rule without them for 11 years, which he called his personal rule, and everyone else called the 11 years tyranny. Predictably, this didn't go over well. Eventually, he needed money, because kings always need money, and he was forced to call Parliament back. They presented him with a list of grievances, and his response was essentially to try and arrest them, leading to a civil war. After years of bloodshed and Charles consistently refusing any compromise that didn't involve him winning completely, a small, very tired, very angry group of parliamentarians decided they'd had enough. On January 30th, 1649, they chopped his head off in public, proving that divine right is no match for a sharp axe and a total loss of patience. Executing a king is the easy part. Figuring out what to do next is where the real headache begins. England was now a commonwealth, a republic without a monarch, which sounded great in theory. In practice, it was run by the Rump Parliament, so named because it was the leftover bit of the Long Parliament after a colonel named Thomas Pride purged everyone who still felt a bit queasy about the whole regicide thing. This rump was a mess of competing interests, radical idealists, and men who were suddenly in charge of a country and had no idea how to actually run it. They argued about everything from religious doctrine to land reform, all while the army that won the war watched from the sidelines, tapping its foot impatiently. This army, the New Model Army, was a professional fighting force, deeply religious, and absolutely convinced of its own righteousness. And at its head was our man, Oliver Cromwell, a gentleman farmer turned military genius who was getting increasingly tired of all the talking. He saw a nation adrift and, like any good manager, decided the committee in charge needed to be fired. Violently. Before he could sort out the politicians at home, Cromwell had some unfinished business in Ireland. The country had been in a state of rebellion for years, a complex Catholic royalist uprising. Cromwell's solution was, to put it mildly, direct. He arrived in 1649 with his hyper-efficient army and a conviction that he was God's own sledgehammer. His campaign began at the town of Drogheda. When the garrison refused to surrender, he stormed the town and ordered that no quarter be given. We're talking about the killing of around 3,500 people, including soldiers, priests, and civilians. Cromwell himself wrote back to Parliament describing it as a righteous judgment of God upon these barbarous wretches. He then did much the same thing at Wexford. This wasn't just warfare, it was terror designed to break the will of a nation. The campaign was followed by the Act for the Settlement of Ireland in 1652, which confiscated vast amounts of Catholic-owned land and gave it to Protestant soldiers. It fundamentally and brutally reshaped Irish society, leaving a scar so deep that the "curse of Cromwell" is still a potent phrase there today. It was a masterclass in how to win a war and lose the peace for the next 400 years. Having thoroughly traumatized Ireland, Cromwell turned his attention to Scotland. The Scots, who had initially been allies against King Charles I, were now horrified that the English had actually killed him. They decided to back his son, the future Charles II, which Cromwell saw as a betrayal of their shared Protestant cause. So, naturally, he invaded. At the Battle of Dunbar in 1650, Cromwell was outnumbered and seemingly trapped. The Scottish Scottish army was advised by its Presbyterian clergy, who, convinced God was on their side, pressured their general to abandon a strong high ground position for a quick victory. Cromwell saw their mistake, attacked at dawn, and completely crushed them. He famously wrote that the Lord had delivered them into his hands. His correspondence with the Scottish clergy is a masterwork of theological trash-talking. He basically told them, "I beseech you, in the bowels of Christ, think it possible you may be mistaken." It was a polite 17th century way of saying, "Are you sure God is really on your side? Because my army just wiped the floor with yours." He then proceeded to conquer Scotland, uniting Great Britain under a single military government for the first time, because nothing says unity like an invasion. With Ireland and Scotland subdued, Cromwell returned to London in 1653, walked into the Rump Parliament, and got fed up with them all over again. He brought in soldiers and literally kicked them out, allegedly yelling, "You have sat too long for any good you have been doing lately. In the name of God, go!" He then basically made himself the boss, taking the title Lord Protector. This was a monarchy in all but name, which is deeply ironic for a guy who just fought a war to get rid of one. To enforce his vision of a godly nation, he divided England into districts run by major generals. These were military men tasked with enforcing Puritan morality. This is where the war on fun really kicked into high gear. Theaters were closed, sports were banned on Sundays, and excessive merriment was frowned upon. They even made a serious attempt to cancel Christmas, arguing it was a popish, wasteful festival. Mince pies and plum pudding were deemed suspect. This wasn't just a suggestion, laws were passed. It turns out that people who have just survived a bloody civil war don't appreciate being told they can't have a beer by a military official. The major generals became so universally hated that the system was scrapped after about a year, a rare failure for Cromwell's otherwise firm grip. By 1657, many in government were desperate for stability. The whole Lord Protector thing felt temporary and weirdly dependent on one man not dying. So they came up with a plan: make Cromwell king. It sounds insane, but their logic was that a monarchy, even a new one, was a familiar and legal form of government. They presented him with a new constitution, the humble petition and advice, which officially offered him the crown. This triggered a personal crisis for Cromwell. For weeks, he agonized over the decision. On one hand, it would solve the succession problem and make his rule legitimate. On the other, had he not just spent a decade fighting a war against the very concept of monarchy? He gave long, rambling, and often confusing speeches about it. He claimed to be wrestling with God's will. Ultimately, he refused the title. Was it because of his humble Puritan piety? Or was it because he knew the army, his real power base, was deeply anti-monarchy and might just overthrow him? It was probably the second one. He kept all the kingly powers, just without the shiny hat. A classic case of having your cake and eating it too, as long as the cake isn't for a Christmas party. He is the strange thing about Cromwell's rule. While he was busy making England a miserable place to live, he was also making it one of the most respected and feared powers in Europe. His foreign policy was shockingly effective. He poured money into the navy, creating a fleet that could challenge anyone. This led to the First Anglo-Dutch War, a conflict between two Protestant republics over trade. England, surprisingly, won. He then turned his attention to Catholic Spain, launching the Western Design, an ambitious plan to seize Spanish colonies in the Americas. While the main goal of capturing Hispaniola failed miserably, the fleet did manage to capture a consolation prize, a small island called Jamaica. It didn't seem like much then, but it became the foundation of the British Empire in the Caribbean. Under Cromwell, England went from a chaotic, inward-looking nation to a major player on the world stage. It's a bizarre legacy, a domestic tyrant who banned theater but created a navy that would dominate the seas for centuries. He made England powerful, just not very fun. The entire protectorate system was held together by one thing: Oliver Cromwell's sheer force of will, and by 1658, that force was starting to wane. He was in his late 50s, but he was exhausted, worn down by decades of war and political strife. The state was also effectively bankrupt, as keeping a huge standing army and navy is ruinously expensive. Then came a devastating personal blow. His favorite daughter Elizabeth died of cancer. Cromwell was shattered, and his own health, already poor, took a nosedive. He was suffering from malaria, which he'd likely had for years, and what was probably a urinary tract infection. In an age without antibiotics, that was a death sentence. He died on September 3, 1658, the anniversary of his two greatest victories at Dunbar and Worcester. He was given a funeral worthy of a king, buried in Westminster Abbey among the monarchs he had overthrown. The great question was whether his republic could survive without him. He named his eldest son, Richard, as his successor, and poor Richard was about to find out that being the son of a revolutionary genius is a very, very tough gig. Richard Cromwell, bless his heart, was not his father. Where Oliver was decisive and ruthless, Richard was gentle and hesitant. The army generals quickly gave him the nickname Tumble-Down Dick, which tells you everything you need to know about their level of respect. He had no real power base. The army didn't trust him because he wasn't a soldier, and the politicians saw him as a pushover. He lasted less than 9 months as Lord Protector before the army basically told him to go home. He did. What followed was a complete political breakdown. The army and parliament tried to rule together, then fought each other, and the country descended into chaos. People were sick of it. They were tired of military rule, tired of Puritanism, and tired of instability. The memory of the good old days under a king, even a difficult one, started to look pretty appealing. General George Monk, the commander of the army in Scotland, saw which way the wind was blowing. He marched his army to London, restored the Long Parliament, and began negotiations to bring back the monarchy. In 1660, Charles II, the executed king's son, was invited back to take the throne. After all that war, revolution, and Republican experimentation, England just hit the undo button. The restoration of the monarchy meant a reckoning was coming for everyone involved in the execution of Charles I. The men who signed the death warrant, the regicides, were hunted down. Some were hanged, drawn, and quartered. But what do you do about the chief architect of the whole affair, Oliver Cromwell, who was inconveniently already dead and buried? The new royalist government had a creative and deeply petty solution. In January 1661, on the 12th anniversary of Charles I's execution, they dug up Cromwell's body from Westminster Abbey. They also exhumed the bodies of 2 other prominent parliamentarians. The corpses were taken to Tyburn, the site of public executions, and hanged in chains for a day. That evening, they were taken down and beheaded. The bodies were thrown into a common pit, but Cromwell's head was stuck on a 20-foot spike above Westminster Hall, the very building where he had condemned a king to death. And it stayed there for over 20 years, a gruesome, rotting warning to anyone who might get any bright ideas about overthrowing a monarch again. It was a perfectly absurd ending for a man whose life was a whirlwind of violent conviction and profound irony. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!